My mother handed me a dish towel at my sister's engagement party and said, loud enough for the whole kitchen to hear, "You always were better at cleaning up other people's messes." She thought she was putting her difficult older daughter back in her place. She had no idea she was speaking to the Crown Attorney who had just closed the biggest organized crime case in Ontario's history, or that the house she was hosting this party in was legally mine. My name is Haley Okafor. I'm 32 years old, and I was standing in the kitchen of my childhood home in Oakville, holding a dish towel that smelled like lemon dish soap and old humiliations, thinking about how strange it is that some rooms never let you grow up inside them. The drive from downtown Toronto had taken just under an hour. I'd made it dozens of times. Along the QEW with Lake Ontario stretching grey and enormous to my left, the skyline shrinking in my rearview mirror, the neighborhoods getting quieter and greener the further west I went. It used to feel like coming home. Lately, it felt like driving toward a version of myself I'd worked very hard to outgrow. My sister, Cassie, was getting engaged. Her boyfriend, now fiancé, was a man named Brett, who sold commercial real estate in Mississauga and had very strong opinions about the Leafs. My mother adored him. My mother adored anyone who wore a collared shirt without being asked and remembered to bring wine. I had parked on the street, walked up the front path, and before I'd even set my bag down, I was handed a towel. That's the thing about going home. The choreography is already written. You step back through the door, and the old rows snap back into place like a rubber band. And if you've ever felt what it's like to have a rubber band snap against an old bruise, you know exactly what I mean. I didn't say anything. I tipped the towels. I started wiping down the counter while my mother went back out to greet people, her voice lifting into that warm, musical register she reserved for guests and good impressions. Through the doorway, I could see Cassie laughing, touching Brett's arm, her ring catching the light. She looked beautiful. I was genuinely happy for her. Those two things, loving your sister and feeling invisible at her party, can exist at the same time, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I should explain something about my family because without it, nothing that comes later will make sense. My father passed when I was 19. He was a civil engineer who had grown up in Lagos and come to Canada on a scholarship in the mid-80s. He was methodical, quiet, funny in a dry way that caught you off guard. He was to make Saturday morning pancakes and read the Globe and Mail out loud to whoever was in the kitchen, editorializing under his breath. He called it keeping informed. I called it the best part of the week. He left the Oakville house to me. Not because he loved me more than Cassie, I don't believe that was it at all, but because he knew something about how the family worked that nobody said out loud. He knew that my mother, for all her warmth toward the world, had a blind spot shaped exactly like me. He knew that without some tangible anchor, I would be cut loose entirely, so he made sure I had one. My mother had contested the will, quietly through a lawyer, over about 18 months. In the end, the house remained mine. I let her continue to live there because it was the right thing to do and because a part of me kept believing that time would soften things between us. That was my own blind spot. I grew up understanding that in our house, achievement came in two currencies, visible and invisible. Cassie's achievements were visible. She was in the school play. She won the public speaking competition. She brought friends home on Friday nights and her mother set out snacks. My achievements had a tendency to be the other kind. I was quiet. I read too much. I chose law because I believed in it, not because it photographed well. My acceptance to Osgood Hall Law School was met with a mileage that's wonderful sweetheart and a pivot to whether Cassie needed new volleyball shoes. I'm not telling you this to make my mother sound like a monster. She wasn't. She just had a particular frequency she broadcast on, and I was never quite tuned to it. The gap between us wasn't cruelty. It was something quieter and in some ways harder to name, a sustained, gentle failure to see me. My father saw me. He was the one who drove me to the LSAT prep course on Saturday mornings, who read my personal statement drafts with his reading glasses perched on his nose and a pencil in his hand. When I was in second year and genuinely wondering if I'd chosen the wrong path, he took me out for Jamaican food on Bloor Street and said very calmly, "The people who change things rarely announce it in advance. They just do the work and let the record speak." He ordered us both oxtail stew and didn't say another word about it. I went back to school on Monday with my head tear. I stood at his grave in the Bronte Creek area cemetery whenever things got heavy. The stone was simple, his name, the years, and a single line he'd picked out himself from a Chinua Achebe novel. Until the lion learns to write, every story will glorify the hunter. I would stand there in whatever weather and just breathe. It was the only place I knew how to be quiet without feeling erased. The night of Cassie's party, I lasted about 2 hours. I helped in the kitchen. I made polite conversation with Brett's mother, a warm woman from Sudbury who asked about my work with genuine curiosity. When I told her I was a Crown attorney, she leaned forward and said, "Oh, really? What kind of cases?" And I felt the particular small shock of being actually asked. I told her a little about the work, not the case I just closed, which was still partly under a publication ban, but the nature of it. Prosecution, evidence, the slow, methodical business of making sure the right story gets told in the right room. My mother floated through at that moment. She always did love rules, she said pleasantly, refilling the woman's wine and moved on. Brett's mother looked at me over her glass. There was something careful in her eyes. "She seems very proud of you," she said in the tone people use when they mean the opposite and are being kind about it. I drove back to my apartment in the annex that night and sat for a long time at my kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold. My apartment was the way I liked it. Books in every room, a print of the Toronto skyline I'd bought at a market on Queen Street West, my diplomas in a closet, because I'd never gotten around to framing them. I thought about my father. I thought about the dish towel. I thought about how long I had been managing this particular ache. The ache of being in a family and still somehow outside it, and how much energy it had cost me over the years to simply absorb it and carry on. The next morning, a text came from a number I almost didn't recognize at first. It was from Cassie's friend, Renata. No, wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Her name was Yemi. Yemi Adeyemi. She'd been Cassie's roommate for 1 year in undergrad and then drifted into a different orbit, but she and I had stayed loosely in touch. She was a warrant officer in the Canadian Army Reserves, working full-time now with the Department of National Defense, and she had an instinct for reading rooms that I'd always respected. "I was there last night. Can we talk?" We met the next afternoon at a cafe on College Street, the kind with mismatched chairs and coffee that comes in a ceramic cup without handles. Yemi was already there when I arrived, sitting straight backed out of habit, both hands around her mug. She looked at me the way she always had, direct, no preamble. "Your mother has been telling people at her charity board that you have anger issues," she said. "That you've been difficult since your father died, that you're contesting the house arrangements out of grief." She paused. "Three of those women are friends with a journalist who writes the social column for a local lifestyle publication. The kind that covers charity galas and houses in South Oakville." I set down my coffee. "She's also been telling Brett's family that the reason you're not close with Cassie is because you've always been jealous of her." Yemi's voice was steady. "She's building a narrative, Haley, and she's been building it for a while." The strange thing was I wasn't surprised. I was something else. A cold, clear-eyed recognition. The same feeling I got in the middle of a complex prosecution when the pieces finally arranged themselves into a shape you couldn't unsee. "I need you to tell me everything," I said. Yemi did. She had been quietly paying attention for over a year. Not conspiratorially, just the way observant people do when they're watching something unfold and feel a responsibility not to look away. She had screenshots of a Facebook post my mother had shared in a private community group. She had overheard a conversation at a fundraiser. She had, most significantly, connected me to a woman I hadn't spoken to in some time. Her name was Sandra Wu. She was a senior associate at the family law firm my father had used, and she had been his personal counsel for the last 4 years of his life. She had been present when the will was drafted. She was, Yemi told me, willing to speak with me. I called Sandra that evening from my office. It was after 7, and the Crown Attorney's office on University Avenue was mostly empty, the kind of quiet that only happens in law buildings after hours. A weighted, deliberate hush. Sandra's voice on the phone was careful and precise. She told me things that had been in sealed documentation for 3 years. She told me about a conversation my father had with her 6 months before he died, in which he had laid out, with the calm of a man who has made his peace, exactly what he believed would happen after he was gone, and exactly what he wanted in place to prevent it. He loved your mother very much, Sandra said. But he knew her. He knew her, you Maud. He knew she would not be able to help herself. There was a pause. He talked about you often, Haley. He said you had the kind of integrity that makes people uncomfortable because it holds a mirror up. He said he hoped you'd find a way to let people in more, but he never doubted you. Not once. I sat with that for a long time after I hung up. What happened next was not an act of anger. I want to be clear about that, because I think anger is often the first explanation people reach for when a woman decides to stop absorbing and start responding. It wasn't anger. It was something I can only describe as clarity. The kind that comes when you've been looking at a complicated situation for so long that your eyes have adjusted to the dark, and then someone turns on a light and you see the whole room at once. I spent 3 weeks preparing, quietly, methodically, the same way I'd prepare a case. Sandra walked me through every document, the original will, the notation my father had made about the house, the letters he had left, letters I didn't know existed, that outlined his wishes in his own handwriting, in clear and unambiguous language. He had anticipated a challenge. He had prepared for one. He had left me, in the most literal possible sense, the tools to defend myself. Yemi, meanwhile, helped me understand the social architecture my mother had built, who she had spoken to, what story was circulating, where the weak points were. She approached it the way she approached logistics, methodically, without emotion, with a clear view of the objective. I didn't plan a dramatic confrontation. That's not how I work. What I planned was simpler. I was going to be present. I was going to be fully, undeniably present, and I was going to let the truth speak in the room where the lies had been told. The engagement party was held 6 weeks later at a venue in Paddington, a restored heritage building near the lake, all exposed brick and Edison bulbs and long wooden tables. 300 people. Brett's family, my mother's charity circles, Cassie's friends, people from the neighborhood I'd grown up in. My mother had planned it with the kind of precision she reserved for things that mattered to her, tables arranged just so, a floral arrangement that had been discussed with the florist for weeks, a slideshow of Cassie and Brett's relationship set to an Ed Sheeran song. There was no role assigned to me in the program. I had been listed in the printed program, and I use listed deliberately, the way you list an item on an inventory, as Haley, Cassandra's sister. I arrived 20 minutes early, which meant I was there before most of the guests and before my mother had fully settled into her hosting posture. She saw me come in, something passed across her face. A quick recalibration, a social composure reflex, and then she smiled. Haley, I wasn't sure you'd make it. Of course, I said. I found my seat at a table near the back. It was, I noticed, placed between Brett's uncle from out of town, who didn't know anyone, and an empty chair. The evening unfolded the way those evenings do. Wine, appetizers, the ambient sound of 300 people being warm to each other. Brett's father gave a toast that was genuinely funny and ended with something kind about Cassie. My mother gave a toast that was beautifully composed and made several people cry and ended with, "Our family has always been our greatest achievement." And I sat and listened and thought about my father's handwriting in those letters. Then the MC, a friend of Brett's from university, invited anyone who wanted to share a memory or a word to come up. There was a pause, the kind of pause that has weight in it. My mother began to rise from her chair. But Yemi, sitting 3 tables over, had already stood up. Igemi was in civilian clothes, dark trousers, a simple blazer. She didn't look like what she was. She walked to the microphone with the calm of someone who has stood in much more demanding rooms. And she said clearly, "Before the evening goes any further, I think there's something this room should know." She said it the way you'd make an announcement about the weather, factual, composed, with a quiet underlying authority. The room shifted its attention. My mother sat back down. Yemi spoke about me, not the way people speak at celebrations, with softened edges and crowd-pleasing generalities. She spoke specifically. She said that I was the Crown attorney who had led the prosecution team on a case involving a trafficking network operating across 3 provinces. A case that had been in the news but whose lead prosecutor had been by convention unnamed during the proceedings. She said the publication ban had been partially lifted that week. She said my name, my title, and what I had done. She said that the people in that room who had been told I was distant or difficult or jealous or unstable deserved to know who they were actually being asked to judge. There was a silence in that room that I will carry with me for a long time. Not the silence of shock, though there was some of that. The silence of 300 people revising a story they'd been handed. Amy sat down. I hadn't planned what happened next, and that is the God's honest truth. Sandra Wu, who was there as a guest, as she had been my father's counsel and was known to the family, stood up without being prompted. She didn't go to the microphone. She simply stood at her table and said, in a carrying voice, I was Lionel Okafor's lawyer for 4 years. He told me once that his oldest daughter was going to do something that mattered. I just want it said that he was right. She sat back down. I don't know who started clapping. I genuinely don't. It began somewhere in the middle of the room and it moved outward, and people were standing. And I sat at my table near the back and let it happen, and thought about a Saturday morning in our kitchen, and the smell of pancakes and my father reading the newspaper out loud. My mother left the room. I don't know how long she was gone. Cassie came and found me during the transition to dessert. She sat in the empty chair beside me and didn't say anything for a moment. She looked the way I hadn't seen her look since we were teenagers, younger, somehow, and uncertain. I didn't know all of it, she said finally. I knew some of it. I should have said something. That was harder than anything else in the evening, because it was true and it was honest, and it didn't excuse anything. And it also didn't require me to perform a forgiveness I didn't quite have yet. I know, I said. That was all. I left before the cake was cut. The weeks that followed were complicated in the way that real things are complicated. Not dramatic, not clean. My mother did not call me. I didn't expect her to. Sandra initiated a formal review of the property arrangement, which resulted in a written acknowledgement from my mother's solicitor that the house was unambiguously mine. I did not move into the house. I did not evict her. What I did was have a new agreement drafted, one in which she could continue to live there, and in which a portion of the utilities I had been quietly subsidizing would instead be redirected to a legal aid fund for survivors of trafficking, administered through an organization on Spadina Avenue that I'd come to know through my work. My father's house would not be a monument to silence anymore. That felt right. Cassie and I have been talking more. It's careful, tentative, the way you walk on new ice, testing each step, learning its give. I don't know what it will grow into. I am trying to let that be enough for now. 3 months after the engagement party, I was asked to speak at a law school dinner at Osgood, the same school where I'd spent 3 years learning to read the shape of an argument and find its weak point. I stood at the podium and looked out at the students in their blazers and good shoes, all of them young and sharp-eyed and slightly terrified in the way that the best lawyers always are at the beginning. I didn't talk about cases. I didn't talk about courtrooms or procedure or the professional skills I could have spoken to for an hour. I talked about a different kind of work, the work of staying honest about who you are in rooms that are trying to tell you something different. I told them that the truth is not always loud. I told them that sometimes the most precise and difficult thing you can do is simply refuse to be reduced. I told them about a man who made Saturday morning pancakes and read the newspaper out loud and believed without ever making a performance of it that the quiet, careful people are often the ones doing the most important work. I didn't say his name. I didn't need to. After the dinner, a first-year student found me near the coat check. A young woman with close-cropped hair and the kind of serious face that tells you someone has already made their decision about what their life is going to mean. She said she'd heard about the trafficking case. She said she was hoping to go into criminal prosecution. She asked me what it was actually like, the day you close a case that size, what you feel after. I thought about it honestly. Tired, I said, and then later, something quieter than happy, like things are correctly arranged. She nodded slowly, writing nothing down, which meant she actually understood. I walked out into the October night. The streets were wet, and the city was doing that particular Toronto thing where the lights reflect off everything and the whole place looks like it's lit from the inside. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and just breathed it in. The case. The party. The letters in my father's handwriting. Sandra's voice in the carrying quiet of that room. Yemi standing at that microphone like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. I took out my phone and opened a note. I had been carrying this thing around for months, this feeling of needing to set it down somewhere to make it legible, and standing on that wet Toronto sidewalk with the October air on my face, I finally knew how to start. My mother handed me a dish towel and told me I was good at cleaning up messes. She didn't know I'd spent the last decade making sure the right people were held to account. She didn't know the house was mine. She didn't know a lot of things. And I had spent too long deciding that her not knowing was somehow my fault. If you've ever been handed a towel in a room full of your own accomplishments, this is for you. You are not invisible. You are just early. I keep coming back to the dish towel. Not the party, not the applause, not the legal documents. Just that moment in the kitchen, the lemon smell of it, the way my mother pressed it into my hands without looking at me. There's something about a small humiliation that stays sharper than a large one. It doesn't announce itself, it just settles in quietly and waits. What I've come to understand, not all at once but slowly, the way you understand most things that actually matter, is that what happened to me wasn't random. It was a pattern, and patterns of causes. My mother didn't dismiss me because she was cruel. She dismissed me because she had never been asked to look carefully, and I had never insisted that she try. I kept absorbing. I kept accommodating. I kept deciding that the gap between us was somehow my fault to close, and in doing that, I made it easier for the gap to widen. That's not self-blame. It's just honest accounting. The things we allow, we teach. What change wasn't a single moment of courage. It was a slow accumulation of choices. Choosing to keep the documents. Choosing to call Sandra back. Choosing to let Yemi speak when everything in me wanted to manage it quietly, to protect everyone's comfort at the expense of my own truth. That accumulation, that steady, unglamorous decision to stop making myself smaller, is the thing I'd want anyone to take from this story if they take anything at all. My father used to say that integrity isn't what you do when people are watching. It's what you do when the outcome is uncertain and the cost is real. He was a man who lived by that. He paid for it in quiet ways. In the patience it cost him to stay honest inside a family that preferred performance, in the loneliness of being the person who always told the truth in rooms that wanted a softer version. He passed that to me not as advice but as example. And example, I found, is the only instruction that actually holds. The intelligence I brought to my work, reading an argument, finding the thread that holds a full story together, understanding what a person is actually trying to do beneath what they're saying, all of that mattered. But it only mattered because I was willing to use it honestly. Information without integrity is just leverage. It can be turned in any direction. What made the difference in that Burlington venue with 300 people in the room was that the truth being told was actually the truth. Sandra didn't perform loyalty. Yemi didn't exaggerate. The record spoke because the record was real. And the perseverance. The years of doing the work when no one at home was watching, of closing cases that didn't come with applause, of being the unnamed prosecutor on a case that made the front page. None of that was wasted. It just wasn't visible yet. There's a difference. Invisible and wasted are not the same thing, even when they feel identical at 2 in the morning. If you've been handed a dish towel in a room full of your own accomplishments, I'm not going to tell you the moment of reckoning is coming, because I don't know that. What I can tell you is that the quiet, careful work you're doing is real. The person you're becoming in the absence of recognition is real. And sometimes, in the right room with the right people standing beside you, the record finally gets to speak for itself.